Good afternoon. My name is Richard Marks, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth in a series of noon lectures sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program this quarter. We're privileged to have with us today an outstanding mayor in this country. So far this year we've had Mayor Yorty and an outstanding mayor, Mayor Carl Stokes, and both of them, even being at the extremes of the spectrum, have nothing but praise for today's guest. Besides being the 33rd mayor of San Francisco, he's combined 15 years in government with careers in law, agriculture, international trade, and banking. He's quite an extraordinary person. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mayor Joseph Alioto of San Francisco.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, let me say first of all that I hope this, I don't want to make this a monologue. I'll make some formal statements first. And after the formal statements, I'm hopeful we can have a very tough and rugged question and answer session. We invite you, this may be an act of superfluity, but we invite you to be tough and rugged. We want you to be as direct, as controversial, or as obnoxious as you want to be, really, in asking any questions. And all I want you to let me do is to be direct and controversial and obnoxious, too, in answering those questions. But I would like to get right to some of the issues that are really on your mind. I don't have a prepared text today, but let me say preliminarily that's not because I didn't prepare this talk. A good deal of thought, actually, has gone into this thing, and a good deal of experience. But I have a little suspicion about prepared texts. First of all, university audiences don't think that a political figure can really put a noun, a verb, and an object noun together, or can talk without dangling his participles. And so every time a prepared text is used, there's a suspicion that he's simply mouthing somebody else's thoughts. But more important, there's another reason for not using a prepared text, and that arose out of something that happened just this last year. You remember that very dramatic announcement on March 31st of this last year rather, when the President of the United States said on national television, in that very, very famous last paragraph, when he said, "I shall not seek, nor will I accept the nomination of my party as President of the United States." Well, the story around Washington is that right after saying that, he ran into the White House, down to that room where those speechwriters were, and says, "All right, which one of you wise guys put that last paragraph in this paper?" So I'm not talking from a prepared speech for that reason. I do want to talk to you, however, about the things that concern all of us today, and that's the matter of campus unrest. This occupies everybody's minds. And it's not a San Francisco phenomenon, it's not a California phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon in many respects. But it's not just for a singular reason. There are many reasons for it. The problem about campus unrest up to this point is that it tends to polarize people. On the one hand, you have people who talk about we've got to solve it by bayonets. And on the other hand, you have a group of people saying that we wish we don't solve it at all. This is simply a way of getting disruption for its own sake. But those I want to believe in a sophisticated political community like California are really in a very slim minority. I want very much to believe that. I don't think that either the anti-intellectual approaches taken to this problem as exemplified by Dr. Rafferty, nor the approach taken by those extremists who say that we really don't want a solution, and they say it quite frankly as a matter of fact, is going to help this problem very much. I think that we have in our history and in our constitutional principles everything we need to solve this problem. First of all, let us put aside the notion that this is the worst time in the history of the world for violence. The blunt fact of the matter is that it isn't. You know, those who don't read history are doomed to repeat its errors. And if you will look back, for example, even on when a claim like women's suffrage was being advanced, when that claim was being advanced, we sometimes forget that we had bombings, firing of buildings, wielding of hatchets, that we had this kind of violence. In our own labor history, we know that when claims weren't recognized, legitimate claims weren't recognized, and we didn't crystallize in our own law the machinery for handling legitimate claims, we know that there was a great deal of violence, a lot more than we have right now, for example. And when farmers made certain claims with respect to organization against the collusive and monopolistic middlemen who were depriving them of the fruits of their labors, when they made those claims, you had a lot of violence. You had farmers on one side with guns and sheriffs on the other side with guns, and both used them. And finally, in these three instances that I'm talking about, when everybody stopped yelling at each other, when they stopped polarizing, when they stopped using the kind of shibboleths that were calculated to draw applause, and got right down to the business of, all right now, are these legitimate issues you're claiming? Are these legitimate rights that seek expression? If they are, let's try to work them out. And so we granted women's suffrage, long delayed, but we finally granted. We worked out finally in our labor relations a Wagner Labor Relations Act, which crystallized the regulations by which those rights might be asserted, which indicated how we might have elections, how we get spokesmen, how we get collective bargaining. We did all of that. We passed our cooperative laws, which permitted farmers to band together for the purpose of collective marketing so that they wouldn't be subject to the whims of the monopolies of the times. We permitted all of that. And a great deal of this violence, of course, stopped. And as we look back at them now, all people say who were in the middle of the fight, why did it take us so long to recognize that there were legitimate issues involved which should have been worked out patiently by voluntary association and voluntary bargaining? Why did it take us so long? Now, I submit again that we may be making a mistake in not reading that history in the light of what we have today. Injunctions aren't going to solve anything, and bayonets aren't going to solve anything. They are temporary expedients to handle a temporary matter. What we need now more than anything else is to have the legislature and the college administrations sit down very frankly and try to work out what are the rights of faculty members in terms of collective bargaining, because the big threat today are the teacher strikes, not the student strikes. Have to work out what are the rights of faculty members with respect to collective bargaining, what are the rights of students with respect to participation in policy making on curriculum and personnel. These are the things we must set about patiently to work out, and there's no reason to believe that they can't be worked out. Now, in the course of doing that, there are certain constitutional principles which I've suggested ought to predominate in our thinking. And those constitutional principles ought to be observed. And I would like to suggest, controversially or otherwise, there is more revolutionary juice in the Bill of Rights and in the 14th Amendment. When I say the Bill of Rights, I mean particularly the First, the Fourth, the Fifth, and the Sixth Amendments to the Constitution. There is more revolutionary juice there than you'll find in all of the writings, the somewhat hackneyed writings of Che Guevara or of Chairman Mao. In either case, I'm using revolution in a different sense. I'm using revolution as meaning rapid change within constitutional consent. And I'm suggesting if you want to see the great decisions about breaking up segregation, the great decisions about one man, one vote, being able to do something in a practical matter almost immediately, if you want to see those great decisions about the protection of those in custody, and they are great decisions, don't be fooled by those who say that law enforcement is impossible because of the Supreme Court decisions. Because in historical perspective, it is my view as a lawyer, and now as an administrator in a city, it is my view as a lawyer and administrator that in historical perspective we're going to regard the Warren Court as one of the great courts of all times, in its ability to tell a reluctant community that these rights you must honor, and you must honor them right now with deliberate speed. Let me get back to the other matter. The matter that I'm talking about, revolution, meaning rapid change within constitutional consent. The educational issues we're talking about at State College, for example, are legitimate issues. The question of having a black studies program is a legitimate issue that ought to be negotiated. If we can have those who would study the French language, French culture, French history, French literature, there is no reason why we shouldn't have at the same time a course that would give us the great contributions in Afro-American history and go back to their antecedent roots in Africa itself. And so the question of black studies ought not to be a festering issue. It was permitted to fester too long. And when we have that issue, it doesn't make any sense to talk about bayonets or injunctions. It's simply a matter of getting down and patiently negotiating the means by which that might be implemented. Now, this is the basic issue at San Francisco State so far as the students are concerned, and because most reasonable people are not far apart on that issue, it can be solved. Now, we don't have any jurisdiction, at San Francisco State as a city. We are only involved in terms of the police, and I want to talk about that in just a moment. In our own city college, we do have educational jurisdiction, and we had no problem in our own city college in not permitting that to fester. And I'm talking particularly at you fellows over there with the smirks on your face. We didn't let that fester, and because we didn't let it fester, we didn't have the violence at City College that we're having somewhere else. Now let me talk about the police problem. Again, I want to talk particularly to you folks over here, since that's when you started smirking. The constitutional principles are quite clear. We must sedulously guard the right to express anything on any subject matter. We must sedulously guard that. That's a constitutional principle. You have to have on every campus literally a Hyde Park. A Hyde Park where there can be expressions for the ideas we hate, where there can be expressions for unpopular ideas, where even those things we take most for granted are under constant scrutiny. Now, that mustn't be an idle statement. It must be a real thing. It must be a real thing in the sense that you're prepared to say to students, look, if you want a mic, we'll get it for you. If you're having trouble with your audience, we'll even help you get an audience. If after you've had a chance for free advocacy, you want a plebiscite, we'll get a plebiscite for you. We've done that. We told them it's a shame that those voting machines should sit around year after year rusting until one day out of the year or 2 days out of the year. We'll be glad to put them on our campuses so we can have plebiscites on all issues which are freely debated. And this we will safeguard. We will tell them, too, in terms of the Constitution, that you have a right to be discourteous in your advocacy. You have a right even to be obnoxious in your advocacy. We'll tell them that and mean it, and take everything they have to take. Shouldn't bother anybody if there are those that would use the expression pig somewhat cavalierly. Shouldn't bother anybody. It shouldn't bother anybody if there are those who would yell oink oink on any occasion without discriminating who it is they're directing it against. Shouldn't bother anybody. More often than not, they're doing what comes naturally, so it shouldn't bother anybody. So you do have a right constitutionally to be obnoxious. You have a right to be discourteous. And that'll be constitutionally protected. And we mean that. What you don't have a right to do is after we have been liberal, those of us who believe this way passionately and intently, after we have been liberal in according that right of free speech, the right of advocacy, the accommodation of plebiscite, you don't have a right then to pick up a rock and throw it at somebody who's 3 feet removed from you. You don't have that right. And if you do, we make it very plain, we are going to use whatever force is necessary to neutralize that situation without unconstitutional overreaction. We are not so craven yet, some of us, that after having granted liberal rights of freedom of expression and advocacy and a right to plebiscite, we are not so craven that we're going to step away from a specious argument based on police brutality to use the police power when violence has actually erupted or when it is imminently threatened. Now, it seems to me that keeping these constitutional forces in balance will see us through this problem. It is not being not liberal to believe in the rule of law. I submit to you that only those who are liberal, or even leftists in their tendencies, believe honestly in a rule of law, and only the most reactionary believe in the use of force, governmental, private, or otherwise, to accomplish certain results. In any event, these are the principles we are going to use. Now, in that free exchange of ideas, An idea that can't survive on the anvil of debate maybe doesn't deserve to survive. And if there are ideas we cherish, and there are some of us, I've indicated one of them, that we can find in that Bill of Rights more revolutionary spirit than in most of those who talk about a planned economy planned by somebody at the top. If we cherish those ideas, we don't have to be afraid that they can't stand up in a competition, in a competitive marketplace of ideas. And if they don't, after full debate and full exposure, they don't deserve to stand. For it's a pretty good principle that what survives in a long debate, now this is what the philosophers, I guess, would call the a posteriori method, is that it, or the inductive method? If you look at all human experience as a laboratory, look at it panoramically as a laboratory, and what ideas survive in that laboratory of debate generation after generation as new claims are made, as new claims are advanced, and as new claims are settled, what survives has a pretty good chance of surviving campus debate or any other kind of debate. In any event, let me just summarize before getting into what I trust will be a rough and tumble session, let me just summarize by saying that neither bayonets nor injunctions are going to have anything to do with solving the problems on the campus. The educational issues being advanced by and large are legitimate issues which can be negotiated, should be negotiated, and should thereafter be crystallized into the kind of machinery that will permit teachers to bargain collectively. And not as it now stands. The law now says you can't strike. It's illegal to strike. And yet when injunctions are issued, the courts are afraid to enforce that, and neither Governor Reagan nor Mr. Rafferty nor anybody else is making a suggestion that all the teachers on strike be fired. You see, you have a lag between law and life in this respect, and we've got to bring the law into conformity with the relevant facts of our time. So we crystallize the machinery for doing this and get this behind us. You know, there's a great historical analog in the University of Paris and the University of Bologna. The University of Paris was founded on the notions that a group of teachers or administrators got together and they set out a course of studies. And that course of studies was largely a course in philosophy, theology, the humanities, the liberal arts generally. Very little in terms of the social sciences even. And then they set up shop, they set up a building, and they invited the students to come in. At the University of Bologna, these Italians being somewhat individualistic in their approach to things, at the University of Bologna, the students set up the shop. They got together. We would like to be educated along these lines. They got the building. Then they went out and hired the faculty. Now, this historical analog really sets out the two positions that we find at polls today. Those who say the students shouldn't have anything to say about curriculum and personnel, and those who say that the students should have everything to say about curriculum and personnel. We can, by patient negotiation, work out a series of councils or work out through legislation that participation which students should in fact have, and that participation which belongs to faculty, that participation which belongs to administration. This, I suggest, human reason applied to this fact, practical human reason applied to this problem, and not this wild talk about either bayonets, about injunctions, or about those who say we have to destroy the system and we'll start by destroying this limb of the system because the whole system is rotten. None of those people are going to solve the problem. The constitutional principles I've talked about will lead us to a reasonable solution. Thank you very much.
Would you like to take questions?
Question right here.
Okay.
Right here.
Would you want to repeat them, or you want me to
I'll
repeat
repeat
them?
it. You don't write. You just pronounce it.
At this time, we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers in this room. If you'll stand, preferably closer to the front, give your question, we'll repeat it up here, then we'll answer it. We'll do that for about 20 minutes. At that time, we're going to move into the men's lounge for a more informal coffee hour, seminar, question and answer period with the mayor.
Okay.
You speak rather gloriously about the rights that are mentioned in the Bill of Rights. exist in this society only as long as the people who are in power are willing to let them exist, until they begin to have some effect on the things that they're protesting. Take San Francisco State, for instance. You talk about Hyde Parks on the campus. Where's the Hyde Park at San Francisco State now? Where's the free expression of ideas now?
Where is it? I'll tell you. You want me to answer that?
They're clubbing them under that petty dictator.
Okay.
It's disappeared. It no longer exists. What did Governor Reagan do at Berkeley? Where's the free expression of ideas at Berkeley? It's under a state of emergency.
The gentleman who is expressing his freedom to speech says he doesn't really believe that the freedom to speak or otherwise is actually guaranteed to anybody. And he says, where is the Hyde Park at San Francisco State right now? I'll tell you, so that you'll know. See, your problem is you don't know the facts. And when you don't know the facts, you make an erroneous judgment. Now, let me tell you. I'm getting down to answering it. Right now, the athletic field directly adjoining the campus is set aside for any kind of meeting that anybody wants to have. In addition to that, every entrance is set aside for the advocacy of any position that anybody wants to make. That's right now as of this very moment. School, of course, is not in session. Went out of session last week. And right up until the last day of school, you folks have problems with your facts, I can see this. Right now, up until the last day of school, that was true. That was always provided. My offer to have a plebiscite on any issue sponsored by the mayor's office is a continuing offer, and has been continued at San Francisco State. Now, that's why I think the violence has abated at San Francisco State, because that has been recognized that everybody has a right to make whatever advocacy he wants. So when you say that these things aren't going on at San Francisco State, you simply don't know the facts, my friend. It's just that simple.
I'm afraid that you're simply distorting the facts.
Okay.
Because you have an audience here who you think is unaware of themselves. Would you like to describe the relationship of that athletic field to the campus? It's not directly adjoining the campus as you so grossly described. It's very far away, and it's away from the...
What is far? 100 feet away?
No, it's much farther.
100 feet away from the edge of the campus? You say 100 feet from here?
It's much farther away from
Well,
the center of activities, and why shouldn't it be where the free speech area was before? You talk about the perimeter...
for a very simple reason.
Gates, where you say they have this free speech. What happened when they had a sound truck there with a sound system so that they could get their ideas across to a few more people? Hayakawa climbing on top of it and tearing the wires out of it? Is that your Hyde Park?
Well, now, just a minute. I think you ought to look at the facts realistically again. That center area that you're talking about, which is close to many areas of study, was permitted to be used, as you recall, for approximately 10 days in a row. At one point, some of the community leaders called me and said that they couldn't speak loudly enough in the area. Would I arrange for a mic and a bullhorn? I said I would arrange for a mic and a bullhorn, and we did. And they had their meeting. And I said to those community leaders at that time, are you going to guarantee me that after all of your talking and after all of the exposition, there isn't going to be any riot? And they said, we personally will guarantee that to you. What happened to that guarantee after we got the bullhorn and the mic for them was that a group of students marched on the administration building, and 300 people were there with about 7 people in that administration building. One of them set a firebomb. One of them brought a loaded gun on campus. And we said after 10 days of that you are no longer going to use this particular spot, which has always resulted in violence. We will give you the entire entrance, every entrance, and I don't know what's wrong with that, the entire athletic field. Now, I say that if it's been proved that a particular spot has always been the starting off point for violence, that we have a right, without impinging the question of free speech, and having all of that advocacy, to say that you aren't going to start from this spot, particular spot, again. Now, we defend that as a proper measure in a situation where those who want violence for its own sake were thwarted in their attempt to use a starting off place from which violence had always begun. Yes, sir. That's the gentleman in green. I'll repeat the question as soon as I'll repeat the question.
You know many public officials in office today, correct?
The question is, you know many public officials, don't you? The answer was yes. Do you know any who are for the legalization of marijuana or doing anything about it? The marijuana question is not an easy one. This notion, I'll answer it in my way. I told you, you have a right to be obnoxious on your side and have a right to be on my side. The matter of the law relating to marijuana is unjust. That which made it a felony, for example, was a ridiculous law. It is also unjust in its application, because for the most part those arrests are being made of young people when everybody in our society knows that we have a situation that was somewhat akin to the situation we had under the Prohibition laws, when too many people violated the law. Now we know, for example, today that there are many members of faculties and many institutions which freely indulge in the use of marijuana. That is generally known. We know that there are many people in the creative arts which generally involved in the use of marijuana. We know that there are many people in journalism. But the applications of our law are against a particular segment of our society, and I think are in a need to be remedied. Now, with respect to legalization of marijuana, I do not believe in an outright legalization of marijuana. I don't know of any public official who does believe in an outright legalization of marijuana. The British, after a rather extensive study on the matter, just 3 weeks ago, decided that they should not recommend the legalization of marijuana. And while we have many doctors who say, and perhaps correctly, that if you have here a glass of whiskey, if you have here an ordinary cigarette, and if you have here a marijuana cigarette, that you ought to take the marijuana cigarette in terms of actual physical harm, or harm to your body, that you ought to take it. While that shibboleth is bandied about by too many young people too easily, it nevertheless is a fact of observation, and we have in San Francisco as good a laboratory as anywhere in the world. It is nevertheless a fact of observation that the psychological effects of continued use of marijuana on some personality are the saddest thing we have to deal with today. That Haight-Ashbury district has become nothing but a skid row for marijuana users. The thing has provoked violence, just incredible violence. So now listen what I'm going to say to you. With all of our scientific knowledge, we do not have today anything comparable to the surgeon's report on cigarettes. We don't have anything that has that kind of scientific validity in the case of marijuana. And so both I yesterday and the president of the Ford Foundation yesterday both advocated that the government sponsor a study in depth so that we may clearly know the effects of marijuana. Now, as against those who say that marijuana is not, who say that it is entirely harmful, as against those who say it, don't you ever kid yourself that it's entirely unharmful. Don't kid yourself about that. Be realistic about it. Now, you've observed its effect on a lot of people. And you can't say, observing those effects, that there aren't a lot of people who shouldn't be fooling around with this stuff, because I'm sure you know better. So don't get yourself in this little delusion based on wish or desire of kidding yourselves. One of the hardest things in the world to do, you know, is to look steadily and look whole at a problem where you might have some kind of an interest. And so we don't know today, as a matter of fact, how harmful marijuana is. And as to those who say it isn't addictive, let them be a little more exact. When they say it isn't addictive, let them tell me it isn't habit forming. Like that teacher up in San Francisco that said, I know this stuff isn't habit forming. I've been taking it for 28 years. So don't kid yourselves. A lot of kidding yourself on your side too, you know, and a lot of unreasonable concern about the subject matter by adults who don't understand some of the problems. Now, in between, what we need is a scientific study that will clearly tell us to what extent it is harmful, to what extent the government can, in fact, license it, and without that study, we aren't going to have the answer. Yes, young lady over there. Yes. The young lady suggests that in negotiations between haves and have-nots, and I don't see faculty members and some students today really as have-nots, but we'll take that. This is the kind of language we sometimes get into. The young lady suggests that in negotiations between haves and have-not, that the important thing is feasible participation. And I take it that the purport of the question, though not expressed in that way, is your feeling that maybe negotiations can't be meaningful or fruitful because the bargaining isn't equal? Is this what you're really getting at?
Yeah, who defines the word feasible?
Okay. Who defined the word feasible so far as feasible workers' rights to participation are concerned? We defined it in law. We decided, for example, that there would be collective bargaining based on representatives who were freely elected by the parties. What is it you mean then, madam?
We'll ask you, we need $5,000 in this program. We need 3 more faculty. An administration official will say, well, that's not feasible. We don't have the money.
Yes, and when the labor union said, we need $7 a day, the employer said, that's not feasible. The market won't take it. But they finally worked something out. They worked out a bargaining deal. Then they had access to all of the economic factors. They both developed economic staffs on each side, and feasibility became an element of bargaining. Now, it seems to me that the students and teachers are in a much stronger position today than the working men were when we first enacted the labor laws. Now, feasibility with respect to taxes is a subject matter known. The faculty members themselves are some of the most expert in the world with respect to feasible ceilings on taxes. In San Francisco, we recently submitted to the voters an increase in our education ceiling of 50 cents on the tax rate, and the voters voted on it. And many of us supported it, and many teachers supported it. Many taxpayer groups didn't support it, but we won out. The voters decided that in terms of making our education quality education and maintaining it, we ought to have that kind of a ceiling, that kind of a tax ceiling. So all I'm suggesting to you is that first it isn't haves and haves not. You have strong legislative support for all groups, as you did in labor relations. And feasibility, as in labor relations, is worked out in a competitive negotiations where both sides have full access to all the economic factors involved. Yes, young lady right in the middle here. Yeah, I'll clarify it. Yeah, and I want you to know that people that stand up to you, for example, and say you're a pig, and you're a fascist pig, and I want to say, as I've said before, I don't mind when people call me a pig. I don't mind when people call me a fascist pig. But I think they're getting damn personal when they call me a bald-headed fascist pig. And all I'm suggesting to you, young lady, that I'm not so craven that I have to stand there and take that kind of nonsense from anybody. If anybody wants to be obnoxious, as they say, they're going to be obnoxious in return. And what I'm saying to you is that in many instances, when that word pig has been used, it's been used wrongly, that the person uttering it was more apt to its description than the person against whom it was directed. And when oink oink is used, we have no hesitancy about throwing it back. All I'm suggesting is, if you want to be discourteous, don't stop being a crybaby when people answer back. That's all I'm saying to you. Yes.
On all of the TV networks, they showed, first of all, Hayakawa attacking a sound truck. Now, you said if anyone throws a brick at a building...
Dr. Hayakawa, just a minute. Dr. Hayakawa physically getting on that truck and taking away those wires did an act that was wrong. I don't condone it.
Why wasn't he talking to you?
We don't, as you know, prosecute everybody who engages in an act at the moment. Right. You know that. You know the students were allowed to do a lot of things without prosecution. And we keep telling our policemen, for example, don't go in there when that first brick is thrown. Don't put it in the hands of a character who wants confrontation for its own sake to call the police on campus. And we overlook a lot of things. Now, I say that actually physically taking those wires off was wrong, he should have called the police to do the job. Let me say something. Wait a minute. I want to say something. I want everybody to hear me. Now look, you know, you people talk about the establishment so-called being uptight. Now let me tell you something. Is it possible that you're uptight on the question of police? Is it possible? Is there anybody here? Now wait a minute. Is there anybody here who really believes that we ought not to have a rule of law? Is there anybody here who really believes that somebody who throws a rock shouldn't be arrested? Is there anybody who really believes that?
Do you believe that someone who pulls wires off a sound truck shouldn't be...
You've just heard what I've said, haven't you? Just heard what I've said. I'm suggesting to you that in your extremism against police, you're just as bad as those who would counsel abuse by police. You're just as bad. Okay. All right, what's the next question now?
Program, they show two policemen holding a black person and a third policeman taking his club and lunging it into his stomach. Just about every person I know has seen that. Would you tell that person who had that billy club in his stomach not to call that policeman a pig?
If you will read the papers and get your facts right, you would know, and so you wouldn't be strident and hysterical about it, that in the past year, we have signed 3 complaints, criminal complaints against policemen in San Francisco. Wait a minute. One of them including a charge of manslaughter. In addition to that, there are innumerable instances of disciplinary proceedings against policemen who have overreacted, but so that you won't misunderstand, your evidence on the wind-up, a 5-minute television shot, may not be very reliable as to what is going on at the given moment. I don't question the fact that there are policemen who overreact because they are human beings. I don't question that. We proceed against them. We have a disciplinary proceeding against them. But I'm telling you again that if what you're really saying is that those who use guns and rocks and bottles after they've been given every opportunity for free speech should be let alone, and if you're saying that we shouldn't use police against them, we simply aren't going to subscribe to it. Yes, young man.
Do you think that the Regents' ruling on guest lecturers concerning Eldridge Cleaver and then the George Murray incident go with what you say about academic freedom?
The question is, do I think that the Regents' ruling on Eldridge Cleaver and George Murray go with what you say about academic freedom? As you know, and as the press reported at the time, both Dr. Smith and I asked the trustees not to proceed against George Murray by dismissing him, but to let the administration and the academic senate establish the facts in a regular procedure and then bring a charge against Mr. Murray, let him answer that charge, and have a due process trial on the matter. Now, you remember I said that, and I said it very plainly. Now let me tell you about George Murray, because I think you can get uptight on that subject matter too. If in a proceeding it is established that a teacher said to a bunch of students, bring your guns on campus on Tuesday, if that's established, and any college administration, after due process, doesn't toss him out, that college administration doesn't have any guts. Okay, well, wait a minute. Right now, George Murray is under arrest for carrying concealed weapons in his car. Right now, under arrest for carrying concealed weapons in his car. And he's hiding out, as you know. He's on the lam. So by his own actions, he has made the situation relatively moot. Now, if a due process proceedings establishes that George Murray encouraged people or incited people to assassinate the Chief Justice of all people, Chief Justice Warren of all people, if a due process proceeding establishes that, he ought to be tossed out, and nobody should be frightened on the subject matter. There is always a question of what's right and wrong, you know, and what's right and wrong can relatively be established by human reason when you get enough access to all of the facts. Now on the Eldridge Cleaver answer. Eldridge Cleaver is no stranger to me. I had a television debate with him. I guess I was just one month in office. And Eldridge Cleaver paid me personally the best compliment I've ever been paid, calling me a lot of names in the process of doing it, but he's done just exactly that. Because he said in the magazine that I take it you don't subscribe to regularly, but you might see if somebody shows it to you, a magazine called Playboy, in the November issue. If you will take a look at that magazine, you'll see a verbatim interview by Cleaver. And he says, and this is his definition, that he hasn't been able to mount a revolutionary fervor in San Francisco because of what he calls the token social programs from the mayor's office. You know, in San Francisco, we're very proud about the fact that we've gone into the ghetto and taken the young, tough kids who are prepared to be militant and whom we exhort to be militant within the framework of nonviolence, taking them and using them to push forward those social programs that are working in San Francisco, social programs relating to jobs, relating to housing, and this is the ultimate answer, you know, on law enforcement, not repressive force, although repressive force at certain instances must be employed. We have taken these young men and told them literally, don't let the militant label be stolen by that curious collection of cons and ex-cons and gunmen who believe in violence. Don't let them steal it from you. You keep that militant label. You assert claims, you assert them vigorously. You call for rapid change within constitutional consent, and you do it vigorously. And so Eldridge Cleaver is somebody we've had a little background with and experience with. Now, the university administration and not political figures should determine who should be a lecturer on a campus or who should not be a lecturer on the campus, and that sole determination should be made by the administration of a college. If the trustees, well, the administration includes student councils, you heard me a moment ago. And finally, though, somebody has to make a decision, you know. 1,000 people can't make a decision. They can all talk about it, suggest it. In the final analysis, you take a vote. Maybe you take a majority vote. And it may well be in that majority vote, the students may be in a minority. And if they've had the opportunity to make a full exposition and presentation, they shouldn't complain about it. But in any event, the college administration should make the determination of who should lecture on a campus. And if the trustees don't like the manner in which they're exercising that discretion, I assume they have the right to get a new college administration. But the college administration in the final analysis must make that decision. Yes, sir, back here. Young lady, the girl behind. Young girl, young lady. Yeah. Okay, we'll move into the next room right after this because I know you have a class. I said that the main problem in California was the teacher strike and not the student strike. Will I elaborate on that? It's very simple. If the teachers strike, you can't have a school. If 100 or if 1,000 out of 18,000 students strike, you can still have a school. 17,000 can go to school. This is what I meant by it. But a teacher strike, of course, is the very heart of the matter. Shall we move into the next room and we'll continue, both being obnoxious?
Thank you very much. You're all invited right into the men's lounge to continue the discussion.
Gradually fill in the San Francisco Bay with landfills, garbage dumps, and cheese box developments.
Okay. First of all, the question starts out controversially, and again with a little disregard for the facts, saying you said you were a liberal. I didn't say it. I don't even know what the word means anymore. Everybody knows what I'm doing. Everybody knows what I'm doing. I perform certain acts. And whether you want to call me a liberal, a conservative, a right-winger, or a left-winger, that's a judgment for somebody else to make. Then, after having started out controversially, he says, why have you permitted the San Francisco Bay to be filled in by cheese box developments, I think, and other matters? As you know, I have been for some time an advocate of what is called regional government. That is, that San Francisco, standing alone, would find it impossible to...
That's not easier.
Do you all hear me? I don't think there's any problem about that, is there?
In the back of the room, it's very hard, especially when you turn your head. You have to worry.
Okay. so that we advocated and got through the legislature something called the Bay Area Conservation District. Bay Area Conservation District. And under that conservation district, nobody can fill the bay or do anything with respect to the bay until they make an application. That application is then heard with opportunity on all sides to be heard. That incidentally, that has been given some pretty good teeth in that organization. Now, this constant struggle between those who believe in conservation and those who believe in business development, we're always going to have that. And we have to make an accommodation or rather strike a balance so that the claims of neither are destroyed. And every time you have to strike that balance, I am one of those who adheres to the philosophy that the balance has to be struck on the side of conservation. In other words, if there's any doubt about it, then the conservation argument wins. The business development argument only wins when it is so clear that reasonable people can reasonably disagree about it. Now, in the area that you're talking about is below San Francisco and outside our jurisdiction. The only jurisdiction we do have right now is the port itself. And we are very jealous on that subject matter, and my own views on the matter are quite as intense, perhaps a little more intense, even than yours, as we recently proved when we took on this highway lobby that wanted to wreck that magnificent 23,000 acres of wild land that we have immediately south of San Francisco. So there have been some mistakes made by the adjoining counties in permitting some of the developments, and I think I know the ones you're talking about. That has been done. And those mistakes were made pretty much with the howl of the people in San Francisco, and certainly with the people in City Hall. This was before my time, considerably long. I've only been mayor a year, you understand.
I can clarify what I'm
Which
saying.
one are you talking about?
Right
Foster
now-
City?
Right now, the Leslie Salt Company and some real estate holding companies want to envelop further acreage of the bay for their own private developments. What is your position on those specific attempts to fill in the bay right now?
Well, there again, the area you're talking about is below the territorial jurisdiction
Still.
of San Francisco, but our position, that specific situation, has not been called to my attention since our representative on that Bay Area district is Mr. Thomas Mellon, our Chief Administrative Officer, and he is in there with instructions, just as pretty much as I've delineated them to you, that if there's any question about the conservation aspect involved, you vote on the conservation side. The particular matter you're talking about has not been brought to my attention. And Mr. Mellon is very conservation-minded. The delegate on that from San Francisco is very conservation-minded. Our public utterances on the thing have been attacked as being too conservation-minded and anti-business. So now that you have called the Leslie Salt thing to my attention, I'll look into it personally and see if our position is being maintained in accordance with the principles I've just enunciated. Yes, sir.
Well, there's two things that you said that confuse me. One of them is that you keep using this phrase of rapid change within constitutional consent, and
Yeah.
I don't understand how you can have faith in this phrase in a situation in which the blacks were oppressed, or whatever you want to call it, for 200 years before the construction period, and then for 100 years after the passage of the construction law, they still haven't improved that
Look,
much.
for 300 years, the blacks have been the victims of just an incredible discrimination. That incredible discrimination has taken the form, literally, of robbing them of their identity, their civilization. See, this is a big difference. Earlier I said that we have sometimes covered color discriminations, as in the case of the Chinese and the Japanese. But we didn't take their full identity away from them. We didn't do the horrible things that were literally done to the blacks in 300 years of history. But beginning in a period of approximately 1936, I was the first secretary to something called the FEPC that Franklin Roosevelt did by decree in 1936 to 37. And the head administrator of that was a man who ran the sociology department at the university I attended in Washington, D.C., Francis Haas. He was a tremendous man. I was his secretary, his personal secretary at the time when I was going to school at the time. Now, beginning with Franklin Roosevelt, it can't be said that tremendous strides have not been made, and let me hasten to add, so nobody misunderstands it, haven't been enough, and so much more yet remains to be done. But anybody who says that there hasn't been considerable progress in the last 10 years just isn't being realistic. Now, for the first time, we admit the possibility of doing away with poverty and discrimination in our generation. It's for the first time. We admit the possibility. We are fighting things. We are always fighting hard against entrenched power, has the aspects of monopoly power. We're always fighting hard on that side. But now we admit the possibility of getting away with poverty. You know, there are those people who used to even find some kind of solace in the Bible saying that the poor shall always be with you, and then went on to find some kind of theological reason for not doing anything about it. But now it's different. Now we say we can cure poverty, and we are making that drive. And we have most of the blacks on our side on that drive. And those who think they have to break the system to get their progress will simply set it back 100 years. I haven't any question about it when you have to make a judgment. Now, you know the nature of the human family. There's always going to be injustice of some type, I guess, in the world. There's an element in human nature that is tarnished, I think, as the poets put it. Our tarnished nature. An element is tarnished, and so we always have to struggle against injustice. We always have to struggle against the abuse of power. But both in the realm of economics, where monopoly power, which really ran this country, and still runs substantial portions of it, against what it might have done, say, 50 years ago, we have made substantial progress there. And on the whole question of black-white discrimination and recognizing what must be done, I think the progress within the system, though much remains to be done, has been substantial, and going outside the system will wreck much of that progress. Yes, sir.
As one of the ones who was smirking earlier.
Were you smirking too? No, that wasn't nice, was it?
Okay, I want to get very specifically.
Okay.
This question. The rapid change in the constitutional framework in the past 10 years. That's a two-part question. The first part is, has in the last 10 years, since the adoption of the Master Plan for Higher Education in California, has the black enrollment at San Francisco State College dropped from 11% to 4%?
Well, I don't know that figure, but I'm sure you'll want to know this. Wait a minute, that's part one. 7 months ago, and even though I have no jurisdiction at San Francisco State, as you know, but 7 months ago, I worked out with the faculty and the administration a program where young men from the ghetto areas would be admitted to San Francisco State, even though they couldn't pass the entrance examination, would for 3 semesters not have to meet the standards, but would, beginning the 4th semester, have to meet those standards. There are 250 slots that have not been filled in that program out of 450. Now I want you to tell me why, because there's certainly... No, they're available. I don't think that's true, because we have I don't know whether you know San Francisco, but our ghetto communities are united. As I told you before, the greatest comment we ever had was from Cleaver, who said he couldn't get started in these areas. Our ghetto communities are united, for example, in the redevelopment plan that will literally wipe out the problems in Hunters Point within a 5-year period of time. We just got funded in the last week of the federal government, the outgoing administration, and in the first 2 days of the new going administration, a $50 million program at Hunters Point on a plan that literally came from that community. The plan was formulated by that community. And we got an 11-0 approval by our Board of Supervisors on model cities, which is incredible. With all of the, you know how some people feel on that subject matter. So that when you say those slots weren't filled because somebody wasn't trying hard enough, that simply isn't true.
You mean that black people's interest suddenly dropped off so dramatically in the past 10 years that they don't want to go to San Francisco?
No, let's not get emotional about it. I'm just telling you a fact. Don't get emotional. I'm just telling you a fact. We worked that program out. It's a good program. You don't have to meet any standards for 4 semesters. Economic aid, too. It was implemented by the administration. They just didn't fill it. Now with our city college, Now where we do have jurisdiction, and where we put in black studies a long time ago. First time it came up, there wasn't any problem about it. With our own city college, the standards are deliberately kept very low for any member of the ghetto area who wants to come in. He has to meet the graduation standards later on. There are lots of slots that haven't been filled. The big job that has to be done, and this is where you folks can make a really dramatic contribution, is to get into that ghetto area and motivate young people to want to go to school. It's not easy. We're all, in no sense in smirking about this, because I want to tell you something. I'm not going to take second place to any one of you in terms of my devotion to getting something done about our ghetto areas. It's not going to take second place to any one of you. So don't sit around and smirk at me on it. And I think this record proves it. And I get a lot of abuse from people for being, as they call it in their ridiculous terms, a nigger lover and the rest of that stuff. So you can't smirk at me and get any effect on it. I just want to make that clear. Now what we have to do literally is motivate a lot of young people to realize the value of an education, to realize how important it is. Part of the deprivation, this 300-year deprivation you're talking about, is it has in effect dulled the sense of motivation about things that are really important, like quality education. And we've told our black community, for example, don't worry about your mini boards of local control. You form your own committee to tell me about what black curriculum you want, even in our high schools, in our junior high schools. You form your own committee. And we won't worry about changing the law in Sacramento. You tell me what that program is, and I'll lobby it through our Board of Education. And I've recently, we have representatives, the first time in 100 years that you have a Spanish-American representative on our Board of Education. Young kid, 29 years old, whom I appointed just last year. And you have a black, for example, in San Francisco on the police commission. The first time in history, whom I appointed. And these aren't token blacks. These aren't what is sometimes called, again, in that horrible jargon of the day, City Hall niggers. This isn't anything like that. These are people militantly express the claims that ought to be expressed by the black community, and they express them, incidentally, more militantly than I've heard anybody here express them. And so, I know what the problem is, but the problem is basically one of motivation for some programs that are even now available. It really is. Go ahead.
Deals with rapid change within the constitutional framework, specifically with white-black relations and education on a broader scale. I'm referring specifically now to the South. And I think that if you were to point to people in the political arena who would do the most for black people in power, if they were in power, and responsible for enforcing things like the Supreme Court order on desegregation, you would say that a man like Robert Francis Kennedy would be about the ideal man with his devotion.
Yes.
Now, he was Attorney General for several years and responsible for enforcement of that legislation, along with Ramsey Clark. Now, the latest statistics available from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which came out from their pamphlet on racial isolation in public schools, published in 1967, and giving the figures on the black elementary and secondary school students in Mississippi who attended schools where there was even one white student as of the 1st of January 1967. That figure was to 2.5%. This is after 12 and a half years after that Supreme Court order on desegregation, and after 6 years of Robert Francis Kennedy and Ramsey Clark enforcing that legislation. Now, at this rate, it will take exactly 5 centuries just to desegregate the school system in Mississippi. I think we need something more, do you?
There isn't any doubt that in certain areas in the country where you have ingrained prejudices that have lasted over a long period of time, that we are going to have more difficulties than others. I just suggest to you that the route of revolution would not accelerate what you're talking about, but might set it back. If revolution in the unconstitutional sense, where we pick up guns and fight your way on it.
Constitutional sense is doing.
I think it's doing a lot, my
Who were in
friend.
kindergarten, when that damn Supreme Court order on desegregation came down, have now graduated from high school, and they're all black
Well,
high schools.
I know, but you are dealing with an area where these ingrained prejudices had to be knocked down from the outside by a constitutional system that had a court there to tell them this is the way we're going to do it. Now, I know it's characteristic to be. Yeah, but wait a minute. Wait just a minute. I'll tell you how far. Senator McCarthy voting for Long against Ed Kennedy. That's how far. Okay, that's how far it means. These are the kind of ingrained prejudices and strength that still exists that a man like Senator McCarthy, in a clear-cut choice, would vote for Long. So be patient with human nature. You know, now wait a minute. We can all get tired, but the problem about being tired is that then we go to an excess that sets the damn thing back another 300 years. This is what you have to be careful about. Just stay in that vineyard and keep fighting. The struggle is worth it. Just stay there and keep fighting, and don't get, as I say, don't get yourself lulled into the notion that you're going to do a better job by getting a gun and running down there and trying to shoot the sheriff. It's not going to work out that way.
Maybe not the sheriff, but there are a few other people.
Well, as I say, it sounds good. You see, you talk a little bit like Max Rafferty now. Max Rafferty says, Max Rafferty says the way to solve all this stuff is to bring the guns, the bayonets, and all that silly talk in. Now, don't you get into the excess the other side of it.
Hey, let's not make this a dialogue.
How
Let's
about you,
move on.
Jeff, back there? No, right there, gentlemen, right there.
Talk about constitutional freedom, and one of the things to make is be able to make an issue, and the only way you can get an issue is through violence. In a sense, I'm saying that Chavez has been working in a constitutional framework for change for about 5 years. He's going on his 6th, and it doesn't work. Now, if we, feed a couple other people, your people, you're going to start.
Don't you say your people. You haven't the right to say. You haven't the right to say that to me. My people. You know where I stand on the great boycott. And I'll tell you what we're taking in San Francisco. We have about 20 agricultural associations which have called off their convention in San Francisco to get back at me for my stand in support of the Chavez movement. So don't put me on the other side of that issue. I grew up with the Spanish. All California grew up with the Spanish. The original California Constitution was written in Spanish and in English. So don't put me on the other side, my friend. I'm doing something in the vineyard effectively on, and I'll go ahead with the Chavez talk.
Well, you talk, in other words, because you're doing something, all we get is that your problem isn't getting solved, but we're doing something about it. You constantly, the result is what's important, not your.
All right. Now look, the problem is solved for the construction trades. The problem is solved for the Teamsters. The problem is solved with the longshoremen. The problem is solved with the others. Now we have a new group arising, the farm workers. The farm political movement has been very strong in this country, as you know. It's been overpowering. It's been able to defeat legislation aimed at giving relief to farm workers, legislation which is now urgently needed. I personally have every confidence that we're going to be able to get farm workers included in labor legislation within the next year and a half. And I say that that's the way we ought to do it. Chavez has been a great leader. And Chavez is great. I said that earlier, you recall, that there was more violence than we're talking about now, but we worked it out. But we ought to learn by history, shouldn't we? In other words, I tell you very frankly, Chavez is doing a better job by not listening to the apostles of violence than he would be doing by listening to people like you who imply he ought to pick up some guns. Don't you say you people again. You're talking in the wrong category. Look, we have a difference of opinion. The difference of opinion is this, that we are now in a period in our lives when things which used to take 20 years to do can now be accomplished in 2 or 3 years. I recognize the fact, now wait a minute, the nice thing about people who can talk about exhorting to violence is that they now see the possibility of remedy. Oppressed people without hope never revolt. Those who revolt are those who first perceive the opportunity of remedy and then rush to it headlong. So at least we have come to a point in our society where we perceive a remedy for farm workers. 5 years ago, nobody saw that remedy. Now, don't spoil it by a little wild talk that violence is going to accelerate the pace of remedy. I don't think it will. I say these are judgments people make. And you're entitled to your judgment. I'm entitled to mine, and these things never get quite resolved. I am convinced in the final analysis that violence by the farm workers is not the route to a union measure enacted by the Congress and the state legislature. I'm convinced of that. Yes, sir.
Are you in favor of lowering the voting age?
Yes, I definitely am in favor of voting the lowering age. As you I guess you don't know. As you don't know, I am national chairman of one of the committees on voting that lowering that voting age to 18. And that's on a relatively simple analysis, without trying to give you any sycophantish, is that the word? Sycophantish flattery, without trying to give you any of that. The blunt fact of the matter is that at 18 today, children are better educated than they were in our generation. You certainly work a lot harder at the academic life than we did in our generation. You have a more competitive situation to face. You know, getting into colleges these days is a federal case in many, and in our day it wasn't. And once you're in, you have a greater competition. So I would say that the 18-year-old today is comparable to the 21-year-old of a generation ago. On that basis, students definitely should be given the right to vote at 18. As I say, I'm on that committee hoping to bring it about. Yes, young lady.
I would like to question your assertion that violence does not speed the rate of social change. It's the history of this country, and your example of the labor movement is just classic. There was all kinds of nonviolent labor movement, excluding the IWW, during the latter part of the 19th century, and there was nothing done. There was the AFML, and it wasn't until there was enough organization to have violence that anything was done. Same thing with women's suffrage, same thing with the blacks. For hundreds of years, there have been black people making all kinds of legitimate pleas and demands on all kinds of things.
Right.
Power structure. And
Okay.
until they rioted or sat down and tackled somebody's business, nobody did a damn thing.
Well, I wouldn't say not a damn thing. That isn't. Let me put it this way. You talk about the IWW. Now we have a pretty good example to talk about. The labor movement in this country, started in San Francisco. People don't generally recognize that San Francisco had a labor union government as early as 1880. And they had a labor union government in 1906. Unfortunately, they all got involved in a little bit of graft, and we had some famous trials that everybody knows about. The worst part about that, people keep pointing out to me that the mayor at the time was a Roman Catholic who played the violin. But so we have a little analysis that we could make. We have a little analysis. I'm giving you. Let me answer. Oh, there have been lots of them. But let me first talk on this point. There was an area of the labor union movement that was more violent than the others. And that's basically your IWW crowd that you're talking about. And the reforms that came from those who weren't quite as violent came faster and are more lasting. Because your IWW was basically in those mines, in the Intermountain area, in the copper mines particularly, in the magnesite, the vanadium mines, and progress there has not been as fast as it was in the Teamsters Union, for example.
The IWW failed. But all I'm saying is that in any rapid, social issue that has come up in this country, there has almost always been violence involved.
Well, a generation isn't too long. Look. Now look. In my generation, we have had things that up to that point of time were regarded as communistic, socialistic, and everything else. You've had Social Security in my generation, which is an important thing. You've had control of the stock market in my generation, which is a very, very important thing. You have no idea the kind of exploit. No. Now give Franklin Roosevelt a little credit and give Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt on the black question a little credit for that first FEPC, which came as a result of administrative direction from the president because they knew they couldn't get it through Congress. Now, we have had rapid change on constitutional questions in the last 12 years. We have had rapid change.
There's a lot of laws now that there weren't before.
That's right.
Basically, the people in the ghetto, and I think this is borne out by a lot of federal statistics, are just as bad off as they ever were. If not, there's more unemployment.
Well, I don't think that's certainly not true in the Northern California ghettos. I can't talk about too many others. Northern California ghettos, we did a couple of things that I think we recommend.
Black man, things haven't changed a bit.
That isn't so, young lady. You don't know the circumstances under which they exist in earlier time. For example, we had no problem about going to the airlines and telling the airlines, look, you're a licensee of the city. We spent a lot of money to build this airport. There were 25,000 jobs here. Only 6% of those jobs are held by either blacks, Spanish surname, or Orientals. We want that figure put up almost overnight to 20%. They understood the problem. The corporations cooperated. We got close to 2,000 permanent jobs in that airport in about a 10-month period of time.
10 years ago, could you have done that?
Well, I don't know. It seems to me it might have been done 10 years ago, perhaps not as effectively. We're certainly much more advanced, but there wasn't any violence that attended that situation. There wasn't any violence that attended that. We have, for example, where an employer, the city as employer, has a right to say, look at its own employment records, and if it sees, for example, that it doesn't have a sufficient proportion of blacks, Spanish surname, or Orientals, to say to the civil service people, take a look at your examinations and see whether or not a gardener really has to pass an examination in Shakespeare, determine whether or not the examinations are relevant to the jobs, then do whatever is necessary to do in terms of whatever elasticity you have to see that you get a just proportion of them. And the city buys, say, $100 million worth of goods and services a year. There's no reason why it can't, as we have done, go to the suppliers and say that we want a conscious policy of helping us on employment in the minority areas in San Francisco. That has been done. A great deal of good has come out of that.
As she pointed out, that wasn't done 10 years ago, and that
Well,
was because there wasn't any.
no, I think you underestimate the great contributions to social progress made by Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, and in a closer time by John Kennedy and by Lyndon Johnson. Now let me say, all of you that have some problem about Lyndon Johnson's foreign policy, the domestic program enacted by the U.S. Congress in the last 2 years is the greatest domestic program enacted in our history in terms of social sensitivity. Any question about that? So give a little credit there, and we're coming. Well, we have to move more. Much more needs to be done, young lady, but don't say that nothing has been done, because that's not right. You have a question, young lady, or do you want to skip it now? Okay, sir.
Yes, about the police, especially in San Francisco State. Do you think that it's possible that the police have actually caused more violence than they prevented? This is the impression I've gotten.
Yeah. The question is, do you think it's possible that the police cause more violence than they prevent? Now, there isn't any doubt that any time you have any kind of reaction, that it tends to call for counter-reaction. There's any doubt about it. But that doesn't solve the question I'm faced with. The question we're faced with is this. On a day, and I forget the day, there was a classroom being held at San Francisco State College in chemistry. And there was a 60-year-old or a 55-year-old teacher trying to teach this classroom. And a bunch of kids came in masked, turned over the desks, picked up a typewriter and threw it out the window. Now, what did you want me to do in that situation? Make believe it didn't happen? Is that what you want me to do? Another situation, somebody standing 3 feet away gets a rock that's about twice this size, thrown at his collarbone and almost gets it severed. What is it you want me to do? Make believe it didn't happen? Is that what you want me to do? All I'm telling you is that a policeman makes a sorry rhetoric on a campus. I know that. We wait until the very last moment before interposing the police. But when things like this begin to happen, you've got to be gutless, really gutless, not to do something about it. Now you must recognize this, and I hope you will grant me this. I hope you will grant me that there are some who engage in violence not for reform, but for other purposes. There are some who want confrontation for its own sake, like the fellow who says in the presence of a lot of others, "Come on, let's get in and get clubbed by the cops. Who'll follow me to get clubbed by the cops so that we can create an episode?" Let me tell you fellows something let me tell you fellows who think you're so expert in this business. You're all amateurs compared to the ILWU and in their general strike in San Francisco in 1934. At that time, we had a bunch of professionals, who ran behind bill posters when they had the confrontation with the policemen, who covered themselves with tomato ketchup, and then came running out screaming that the cops hit me. So you folks are amateurs if you think you know all the answers on this kind of thing, and if you think we're naive in this practice. We know what goes on, and we know the kind of people there are, a small minority to be sure, who want violence and confrontation not for reform, but for other purposes. Now the big danger is, and let me agree with you this far, those that want it for that purpose have the technique of believing that if they can excite police reaction by whatever means necessary, that this will somehow tend to radicalize, to use their terms, to radicalize the more moderates. This is the technique. Now, we aren't so unsophisticated that we don't know who these people are. Particularly when it's some 51-year-old youth or some 45-year-old youth. We know who these characters are, and as I say, we aren't that silly. And I'm not worried about whether they're communists or not. Anybody who wants to be a communist in the sense of believing that the state ought to own the means of production, that sense of pure economic Marxism, has a right to that position, has a right to that advocacy. We don't give a damn. I know how it'll wind up. It'll wind up by the Russians going to some goofy paisanos in northern Italy, the Fiat company, and begging them to help them make their automobiles. That's how that system will wind up. I haven't any question about that. But nevertheless, but you have a right to advocate it. Now, there is this technique of radicalizing the more moderate students. There is. And another thing they'll wind up doing, begging America to send them wheat so they can feed their people. That's the other thing they'll wind up doing. But there isn't any doubt that this technique has to be guarded against, and there mustn't be premature police action or wild talk about bayonets. This kind of stuff doesn't answer anything. It mustn't be either one of those things. Nor should there be this kind of talk, which radicalizes on the other side that education is a privilege, not a right. That's a lot of nonsense. Philosophically, it might be said it's a privilege, but education in a democratic society is a necessity. No democratic society can last long without education. And so it's not something that can be withheld, freely withheld. It's a tough problem, but do try to understand our side of it, and do try to understand that if somebody exhorts people to bring guns on campus, we're going to have police there to stop it. We really are. And if that's police brutality, let it be. Yes, young lady.
Is there any means besides billy clubs to control a crowd, say with water? Because it's been noted by the newsmen down here that when it rained up in San Francisco, that the violence was quite a bit lower on campus.
Yes, there isn't any doubt that bad weather, as a matter of fact, Lord Byron had a famous couplet in connection with another sin, which indicated that there isn't any doubt that we ought to use the most effective means of getting the job done that does the least damage. It's simply saying that constitutionally you must never use more force than is necessary to get the job done. And we've made the point very clear with our policemen, for example, that the policeman is not to be under any circumstances an executioner on the spot. We took a lot of abuse from a lot of people when we said, as against other mayors in the country, that you don't shoot looters, for example. You arrest them. Remember when we had all that wild talk that you shoot looters? You don't do that. You arrest them. That's what you do. You arrest them. The thing you're talking about focuses the whole question about mace. Some people thought a chemical was a better thing to use in a club. But then this chemical became a symbol in the minds of too many people. And there was some very respectable evidence that this chemical was harmful and that a club was less harmful. Now, I know now stay with this issue now. Don't you folks are uptight on this issue, and you better look at it. What was that famous phrase of Dean Swift's? Look at it steadily and look at it whole. What do you do when a fellow wants a police fight? The fellow I said a moment ago, come on, let's go get clubbed. So what do you do? Now, you hope to restrain him with as little force as possible. This is the main thing. Sometimes that's abused, and we do have disciplinary proceedings. Believe me, we do, because this whole police question is a very, very delicate question. But what do you do when a 100-pound girl decides to go limp in an arrest? Do you ever try to lift or to struggle in an arrest? It's very difficult in these situations. Now, understand what the police problem is. If the police problem was simply a matter of subduing those who were violent without the motive of escalating the violence, would be relatively easy. All we can do, in effect, to policemen is say, I mean, if somebody aimed that rock at you, or if somebody aimed that rock at you, you'd be the first one in the world to yell for a policeman. And we tell the policeman, don't go in until the very last moment. And when you do go in, just enough force to effect an arrest, nothing else. It's not your business to punish anybody, just to effect an arrest. Yes, do you want to complete that thought?
Yeah. Why does it have to be just for an arrest? Why can't you just go in there to disperse it and prevent
Well, we
violence?
do that a good deal. We do that a good deal. Now, for example, what we do in San Francisco. Let me give you some more specific episodes of allegations of police brutality. Let me give you the Dean Rusk deal. Dean Rusk came to San Francisco. I wasn't mayor but 5 or 6 days at the time. So we got the word that some folks from Berkeley were coming over and they were going to have a demonstration. The police were given orders. This was the Fairmont Hotel. I think most of you know it on Nob Hill. Police were given orders to set that whole sidewalk across the street aside for the demonstrators. Say whatever they wanted to say. We didn't care. We provided a microphone for them. I tell you, I want to contrast that with what happened that same day with the Jeanette Rankin Brigade in San Francisco, which is a little different approach than you took down here in Los Angeles. So they said what they had to say. But they also had with them bags of animal blood. It's a cute little trick where you go down the stockyards and you get a barrel of animal blood, and then in advance, you see you go into the retail business. From the wholesale barrel level, you put them in little packages and you hand them to people, which shows a certain premeditation. And as people walked into the Fairmont Hotel after all of their talks, somebody wanted to go to the Fairmont Hotel to hear Dean Rusk. They had the right to do it, you know. I don't care what you thought about Vietnam. They had the right to listen to Dean Rusk if they wanted to go. And they started throwing the bottles, the rocks, and the animal blood. Some girl about 14 years of age just walking across the street gets her head cut open with a rock, a rough one. So we moved the police in. And it got a little rough, but we moved them in. Now that same day on the very same issue, the Jeanette Rankin Brigade, and you remember Jeanette Rankin was, she's a gal that voted against both wars, and the lone vote against both wars. Jeanette Rankin Brigade had a demonstration march in Washington, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and many other major cities to present a petition to the Congress to do everything in your power to stop the Vietnam War. Now in Washington they got an injunction against that brigade. It's the same issue as the Dean Rusk issue, you see, Vietnam. Washington they got an injunction against it, resulting in the ridiculous situation of a bunch of television cameras zeroing in on this nice little old lady saying to a bunch of burly policemen she wanted to go up to the Capitol steps, and they got an injunction against her going. And she says, really, I don't want to hurt you. I just want to go up there and hand somebody a petition. In Los Angeles, they got an injunction against them from marching into City Hall. In San Francisco, we invited them into the mayor's office and set up a meeting for them on the front steps of the City Hall, gave them a microphone. They had their meeting, made their assertions, and presented the petition to me for transmission to the Congress. And I said, even though I didn't agree with some of the factual recitals in your opening paragraph, I certainly agreed with the notion that Congress should do all in its power to bring this war to an honorable conclusion. And so we took that thing and carried it and sent it on to the Congress. Now here that same day, you had the people at the Fairmont with the bags of blood, the bottles, the bricks, and the Jeanette Rankin Brigade, led, I think, as a matter of fact, by Harry Bridges' wife, coming down to petition for an end to the war in Vietnam. Well, do you really think I was wrong in using the police at the Fairmont Hotel against the bags of blood, the bricks, and the rocks? Do you really think I was wrong? Okay. Okay, anyway, that's the answer on that problem. One of you, you make up your mind as to which of the three of you.
Short question.
Go ahead, make it short, and I'll give you a short answer.
Okay, with your views, how did you get elected in San Francisco?
San Francisco, just take it the last election, you might get a pretty good view of the thing. San Francisco has always had a relatively liberal voting tradition, as you know. I say we had a labor union government back at the turn of the century. Mr. Cranston won in the San Francisco area by 400,000 votes against Rafferty. He only won statewide by 350,000, which indicates the kind of different voting pattern. In the presidential election even, Mr. Humphrey won in the San Francisco area by 200,000 votes and lost statewide by 100,000 votes. We've always had a pretty long tradition of tolerance in the San Francisco area, and liberal candidates, we can't understand. For example, Dr. Rafferty was no big favorite in the San Francisco area, as you know, and he's a darling of so many other areas around. So we have a rather mature, we really have a mature electorate in San Francisco, and I'm very proud of that fact. Yes, sir.
No one's mentioned it, but I've been very, very upset about the oil slick in Santa Barbara, and the pictures in the front page of the Los Angeles Times this morning of the fowl and the fish who have been killed, and no one, to my knowledge, has made a statement which would be seen to me to be the only reasonable statement to end all offshore drilling until the oil companies can prove satisfactorily that they can control.
If you say nobody has made that statement, have you all heard the question?
I'd like you to make it.
Yeah. Well, I made it. I didn't make it, but a lot of other people made it too. I made it just about an hour and a half ago on a television station, and a lot of other people have actually made it. Now here again, there are philosophical reaches to these questions, like most questions too. There are many areas where you have on the one side the claims of urban environment and conservation, just good living, good environment. And on the other side you have the claims of business development. Now, business development must be looked at as something more than just some profiteer or monopolist getting a lot of profits. Business development has to be looked at in terms of jobs for those in the ghetto area, in terms of jobs generally, in terms of the health of the community. And nobody ought to think there's anything wrong with business development. Now, you have to make an accommodation between those two things. But in the accommodation, the emphasis always has to be on the side of urban environment and urban beauty. We've had no problem in telling Governor Reagan not too long ago that he can call these things anything he wants. He isn't going to put a freeway through San Francisco along that waterfront. We think we have, along that marina area, we think we have one of the most photogenic cities in all the world. And we have a certain obligation to people who are going to be here 100 years from now to keep it photogenic. And so even though it might be better for business or better for motorists who can go through San Francisco faster to have a freeway through the marina, we tell them the only way they're going to get is to put it underground. And of course we get all of the conversation that we're obscurantists, we're this, we're holding up business, and all this kind of nonsense. So you have to make this accommodation. And in making this accommodation, give full weight to the benefits of both sides, but as against any doubt, favor the conservation. Yes.
Could you tell me, are you planning to run for governor in the next election? Yes, no,
The question is, am I planning to run for governor in the next election? As of the present moment, no. But I hadn't planned to run for mayor of San Francisco 7 weeks prior. Now, what I'm saying on that is I'm simply keeping my option open to run for governor. But let me tell you that being mayor of a big city these days is a very dangerous political business. Very, very dangerous. You can see what happened to very fine mayors like Lindsay in New York, Kavanaugh in Detroit, and I don't know what can happen. You know, you have to espouse certain positions that are deemed liberal in some areas. My position on the university campus disorder, for example, is not a popular position. I know that. The popular position right now is to say we're going to get all the guns, the cannons, the bazookas, and we're going to take care of all these kids. That's the popular position. Mine is unpopular, so I don't know where this is going to lead me, say, a year from now. If there are more campus disturbances, the election of Governor Reagan, the margin of election of Governor Reagan last time was in large part due to the campus disturbances, which he said he was going to cure, you remember. But every time there is a campus disturbance, it helps the Reagans and the Raffertys. So I don't know where I'm going to be in terms of political viability a year from now, but I do say to you I am keeping the option open to run for that position. Yes.
Along the same lines of questioning, how do you differ on major political issues from just unrest?
The question is, how do I differ from major political issues with Jess Unruh? First of all, let me say, as I've said in many areas, I think Mr. Unruh is a very able man and would make a very able candidate for any office in the state of California that he wanted to run on. Now, I differed from him very noticeably, of course, last year on the question of whether the Democrats were better served by Hubert Humphrey or Senator McCarthy. And I'll leave it to anybody's judgment in the light of subsequent events who was right about that one. Leave it to anybody's judgment who was right about that one. So we have differed in that respect. We do have a little different viewpoint on the whole matter of campus disturbances. Mr. Unruh has not, so far as I know, proposed a system of mediation to be built up by state legislation and administrative action. I think we have different points of view as to whether or not the cities, the big cities, should have the power to deal with certain issues, like gun control. We passed a gun control law, and some court told us that we couldn't do it, that that's the prerogative of the state. And I thought that gun control ought to be in the hands of the cities, which have a more prominent problem on gun registration and gun control generally. So we have differences of opinion, all right, but as I said before, I think Mr. Unruh would make a very fine candidate for any office which he wanted to run for. I don't know, you have a lot of hands here, but you pick them out. You pick them out.
Okay, fine. We have time for about 2 more questions, so I'll just, one right here and back there, and that'll be it.
Mayor, what is your position on reforming the Democratic Party, and what will you be doing in cooperation with Fred Harris to do this, bring this about before the next national election?
The question is, what is my position on the Democratic Party, and what will you be doing in cooperation with Fred Harris to bring this about? As you know, first of all, Senator Harris is an extremely able young man and one of the coming stars in the Democratic Party who means to unify the party. Now, nobody ought to join in any unity plea just for itself. You never sacrifice conviction or conscience to join any unity drive. But it ought to be apparent that the liberal elements in the community are best served, at least in my opinion, by the election of Democrats where social problems are the principal problems of our time. Now, the Democratic coalition has always been one of the labor unions, the academic community, the minorities, the independent businessmen, sometimes the farmers, sometimes, not very often. This has been the Democratic coalition. Now, we mustn't get angry at different elements in that coalition. For example, for those who say, and they have said it, and I disagree very sharply with Mr. Unruh on his view of the labor unions. We've got our labor unions in San Francisco and elsewhere, too, in California. to enact very strong affirmative action programs on minority hiring. As a recent history shows, he can do it. Now, he has called them power brokers who have had their last hurrah. I don't think so. I think that we ought to keep together all of those elements that can assure democratic victory, and the labor unions are very, very important in that matter, as has been shown. With the campuses, the academic community rightfully belong in the democratic area in terms of the social problems of our times, and we ought to unify these elements as well. Now, unity, as I say, for its own sake is no good because nobody's asking anybody to sacrifice principle. But the unity of these elements is so important that we ought to work to find a ground, particularly candidates we can all agree on and principles we can all agree on, because there are many common principles we can. And in that unity, I do think that the Democrats can win the Senate race next year, the lieutenant governor's race, and the governor's race. Am I for a national primary? No. Now, let me tell you why. The question is, am I for a national primary? Having said something kind of nasty about Senator McCarthy a moment ago in terms of his vote for Senator Long, which I find incomprehensible, let me say something nice about him now. Senator McCarthy was able to focus in his candidacy, because of our present primary system, a whole underlying feeling that wasn't being reflected in government for whatever reason at the moment in relation to the Vietnam War. If we had national primaries, only the rich could run. See, it would have been impossible in a national primary setup for Senator McCarthy to run, in my opinion. Because a national primary means a lot of money on advertising, a lot of money on television, and those rates are incredible, a lot of money on newspaper advertising. And so a national primary, while it has many desirable features, too narrowly limits the kind of person, particularly representing minority positions, who can get enough money to run. Now, if you had another system by which campaigns were financed from the federal treasury, for example, by everybody as he submits his tax report, being able to set aside $1 for a candidate or a party of his choice, then ideally a national primary would be fine. But under the present circumstances, a national primary would be for rich people and for rich causes only. For that reason, I would oppose it.
You made a statement earlier white students working together. This disagreement results in punishment report and other reports that indicate the proper place for whites now is to work within their own community. That's what the thoughts are. Likewise for black people.
Well, I mean, yeah. Of course, the whites must always work in the white community to eliminate elements of sickness. The sickness of racism. It's a sickness. The real sickness, no question. So we have to work there all the time. But you do that by espousing programs that are based on justice and equity, by doing the things that are right in terms of the social classes and doing the rest of these things. But the work in the black community is very important, cooperating among ourselves. Is that about it?
Thank you very much.